They told me I had 1 hour to move into the garage, or they'd put me in a home. I looked at the police officer and said, "Actually, they have 10 minutes to leave my property." Watch how I legally evicted my own son. The service at St. Mary's Episcopal Church ends at 12:15 in the afternoon. It has ended at 12:15 for the 40 years I have been attending, and I am usually in my driveway by 12:30. But on this particular Sunday, Father Michaels wanted to discuss the budget for the upcoming Fall Festival, and as the former treasurer of the parish, I felt obligated to correct his arithmetic. So it was 1 o'clock in the afternoon when I turned my Buick onto Elm Street. The sun was high and bright, casting sharp shadows against the white siding of the houses that lined my neighborhood. It was the kind of Sunday that felt safe, predictable, and quiet. As I approached my house, number 422, I saw a white van pulling out of my driveway. It was moving quickly, the driver looking over his shoulder as he merged into traffic. On the side of the van, painted in bright red letters, were the words, "Raleigh Rapid Locksmith." I slowed down. My first thought was that perhaps Sarah, my neighbor across the street, had locked herself out again, and the driver had simply used my driveway to turn around. Sarah is a dear friend, but she has a habit of losing her keys in her garden beds. I waved at the van out of habit, but the driver did not wave back. He sped up, turning the corner onto Oak Avenue with a screech of tires that seemed unnecessary for a Sunday afternoon. I pulled into my driveway. The house looked exactly as I had left it 3 hours ago. The black shutters were open. The hydrangeas by the porch were blooming blue and heavy. The only difference was that Brian's car, a leased sedan that cost more per month than my grocery budget for the year, was parked crookedly near the garage. I gathered my purse and my hymnal from the passenger seat. I walked up the concrete path, noting a few weeds that needed pulling near the steps. I climbed the porch stairs, my heels clicking softly on the wood. I reached into my purse, found my key ring, the leather one with the brass fob. My husband, Patrick, had given me for our 30th anniversary and selected the house key. I slid the key into the deadbolt. It stopped halfway. I frowned. I pulled it out and tried again. It hit a wall of metal. It did not twist. It did not catch. I leaned in closer, adjusting my glasses. The cylinder of the lock was shiny. It was silver. My hardware was brass. It had always been brass. I stood there for a moment, the key heavy in my hand. I looked at the wood around the lock. There were fresh shavings, tiny curls of pale wood dust resting on the darker stain of the doorframe. Someone had changed my lock. I did not panic. Panic is a reaction for people who do not understand procedure. In my 40 years as a court clerk, I learned that when facts do not align, you do not scream. You investigate. I pressed the button on the doorbell. I heard the chime ring inside the house. I heard footsteps approaching. Heavy, hesitant footsteps. They stopped just on the other side of the door. I saw the shadow of feet through the gap at the bottom. "Brian," I called out. My voice was level. "Brian, the key is not working. Open the door." The door did not open. Instead, the small speaker on the Ring doorbell camera crackled to life. I had installed the camera myself 2 years ago, mostly to keep an eye on packages. Now, it was being used as a barrier. "Mom!" Brian's voice sounded tinny and distorted through the speaker. It also sounded patronizing, the tone one uses when explaining to a child why they cannot have candy before dinner. "Brian," I said, looking directly into the camera lens, "why is there a silver lock on my brass door?" There was a pause. I could hear Courtney whispering in the background. Her voice was a sharp hiss, like steam escaping a radiator. "Mom, listen," Brian said. "We talked about this. Courtney and I. We are worried about you." "Worried about me?" I repeated. "Yes. You are forgetting things. You left the stove on last week. Remember? I did not leave the stove on, I said clearly. Courtney left the tea kettle on the burner without water in it. I turned it off before it ruined the element. See? Brian said, his voice rising in false triumph. You are confused. You are mixing things up. It is not safe for you to be managing a house this size anymore. It is too much responsibility. I felt a coldness settle in my stomach. It was the same feeling I used to get when I watched a defendant try to lie to a judge who had already read the evidence file. Brian, I said, open this door immediately. We cannot do that, Mom, he said. For your own safety. We moved your things to the garage suite, the one around the back. It is single level, no stairs. It is better for you. You moved my things? Just the essentials, he said quickly. Clothes, your toiletries. We put a microwave in there. You will be comfortable. And tonight, you should go to Aunt Sarah's house. Courtney already called her. She is expecting you. We think it is best if you spend the night there while we settle in. Settle in? This is our house now, Mom, Brian said. Just like Dad wanted. He told me before he died. He said, Brian, take care of the house. That is what I am doing. I am taking charge. I looked at the camera. I imagined Brian standing on the other side, likely holding a beer, likely terrified, but bolstered by his wife's ambition. He thought he was being strong. He thought he was finally claiming his inheritance. He had no idea what he had just done. You are evicting me, I said. No, he stammered. We are transitioning you to a safer environment. We will discuss the assisted living brochures tomorrow. I found a nice place in Cary. It has a garden. You changed the locks, I said, without my permission. It is for your safety, Courtney shouted from the background. Just go to Sarah's, Margaret! Stop making a scene! I stood on the porch for 10 seconds. I breathed in the scent of the hydrangeas. I looked at the street, where I had taught Brian to ride a bicycle. I looked at the window of the living room, where I had hosted 30 Christmases. They thought I was frail. They thought I was a confused old woman who would cry, pound on the door, and then obediently shuffle off to the neighbors to wait for their instructions. They thought that because I was 72, I had lost my capacity for defense. They were wrong. Thank you for clarifying your position, Brian, I said to the camera. Mom, he asked, sounding surprised by my tone. So, I am going to my car, I said. I turned around. I walked down the steps. I did not look back at the camera. I did not look at the window where I knew Courtney was peeking through the blinds. I walked to my Buick Park Avenue. I opened the driver's side door and sat down. I sat there for a moment, my hands resting on the steering wheel. My heart was beating faster than usual, a steady drum against my ribs, but my mind was clear, crystal clear. Brian was my only son. I loved him. I had paid for his braces. I had paid for his college tuition, which he wasted on a philosophy degree he never used. I had paid for his first wedding, which ended in divorce. And I had sent a generous gift for his second wedding to Courtney. When his technology startup failed 6 months ago, I was the one who offered him a place to stay. Just for a few weeks, Mom, he had said, standing on my porch with 3 suitcases and a look of desperation. Just until the investors call back. The investors never called back. Weeks turned into months. Brian stopped looking for work. Courtney started rearranging my kitchen cabinets. They began to complain about the temperature I kept the house. They began to hint that the master bedroom was wasted on one person. I had seen the signs. A court clerk sees the pattern of entitlement every day. It starts with a favor, becomes an expectation, and ends with a demand. But I was not just a mother. I was a woman who understood contracts. When Brian moved in, I did not just hand him a key. I sat him down at the dining room table. I placed a document in front of him. "What is this?" he had asked, laughing nervously. "It is a residential lease agreement," I had told him. "Mom, seriously? You are going to charge me rent? $1 a month," I said. "But the terms are important. Read it." He had rolled his eyes. He had signed it without reading a single word, scrawling his signature at the bottom just to make me stop talking. He thought it was a quirk. He thought it was just his mother being officious and bureaucratic. He did not know about Clause 14b. Clause 14b. Tenant shall not alter, change, or add locks to the premises without prior written consent from the landlord. Any violation of this clause constitutes an immediate breach of lease, forfeiture of tenancy, and will be treated as Section 14-15-9.13, criminal trespass, under North Carolina law. I looked at the house again. It was a beautiful house. My husband Patrick and I had bought it in 1981. But Brian was mistaken about one very important detail. He thought Patrick and I had bought it together. He thought that because he was Patrick's son, he had a claim to the title. He thought probate law worked on sentiment. He was wrong. I bought this house 3 months before I married Patrick. I used the money my grandmother left me. The deed is in my name alone. Patrick's name was never on the title. We kept our property separate because Patrick was a gambler in his early years and I was prudent. Brian did not own a single brick of number 422 Elm Street. He was a tenant who had just performed an illegal self-help eviction on his landlord. I reached for the lever to pop the trunk. Most people keep a spare tire and jumper cables in their trunk. I kept those things too. But tucked under the woolen emergency blanket, bolted to the frame of the car, was a fireproof document. Safe. I learned in 1974, during the Great Flood, that you never leave your essential documents in a place you cannot reach in 5 minutes. When Brian moved in, I moved the originals to the car. I started the engine. I did not drive away. I simply moved the car across the street and parked it in front of Sarah's house. I needed a workspace. I needed a phone. And I needed a witness. I turned off the engine. I stepped out of the car and walked to the trunk. I opened it. The black metal box stared back at me. It was time to go to work. I put the Buick in park in Sarah Jenkins' driveway. I did not turn off the engine immediately. I watched the front of my own house through the rearview mirror. The curtains in the living room moved slightly. Courtney was watching. She was waiting for me to drive away, to retreat to a hotel, to fade into the background of my own life so she could begin repainting my walls. I turned the key, and the engine died. I stepped out into the cool afternoon air. Sarah's front door opened before I was halfway up the walk. Sarah is a widow, but she fills her time with gardening and gossip rather than paperwork. She was wiping her hands on a floral apron, her face pinched with worry. "Margaret," she called out, hurrying down the steps. "I saw the van. I saw that man at your door. Did you lose your keys? I was about to bring over my spare set." I stopped by the trunk of my car. "No, Sarah," I said calmly. "I did not lose them. They were revoked." "Revoked?" She stopped a few feet away, confused. "Brian changed the locks," I said. "He and Courtney are inside. They have informed me that I am to live in the garage or go to a nursing home." Sarah's mouth fell open. Her hand flew to her chest. "Brian? Your Brian? But he is such a nice boy. He always waves when he gets the mail." "He is a desperate boy," I corrected, "and desperation makes people ugly. Sarah, I need to use your kitchen table, and I need you to stand by the window and watch. If they try to move anything out of the house, you tell me immediately." "Of course," she said, rallying to the cause. "Come inside. I will put on coffee." I did not go inside yet. I turned to the trunk of the Buick. I inserted my key and popped the lid. The trunk was neat. organized. In the center, bolted to the floorboard with a custom bracket Patrick had installed years ago, was the fireproof safe. It was heavy, black steel, dented in one corner from the time we moved it during the flood of '96. I spun the combination dial, right to 14, left to 22, right to 81. The latch clicked. I opened the lid. Inside, hanging in color-coded folders, was the summary of my life: birth certificates, marriage license, Patrick's death certificate, and in the red folder marked property, the documents that were about to end my son's residency. I pulled out the red folder. I closed the safe. I slammed the trunk. Inside Sarah's kitchen, the air smelled of cinnamon and coffee. I spread the documents out on her oak table, pushing aside a vase of tulips. Sarah brought me a mug of black coffee. She hovered, looking at the papers. "What are those?" "This," I said, picking up a yellow document with a raised seal, "is a warranty deed, dated October 4th, 1981. I smoothed it out. The paper was thick, high quality. Brian believes that because Patrick died, half the house belongs to him by laws of intestacy," I explained. "He thinks it is a marital asset. He thinks I am just the custodian of his inheritance." I pointed to the grantee line. Sarah leaned in, adjusting her reading glasses. "Margaret Ann Miller," she read. "It does not say Sullivan." "No," I said. "I bought this house 3 months before I married Patrick. I used the money my grandmother left me. Patrick moved in after the wedding. His name was never added to the deed. We kept our finances separate because Patrick loved poker more than he loved savings accounts." I looked at Sarah. "This house is 100% mine. Brian has 0 equity, 0 claim. Then why did he think he could kick you out?" Sarah asked. "Because he is arrogant," I said. "And because he never bothers to check the county registry." I set the deed aside and picked up the second document. It was crisp, white, and recent. The ink on the bottom was still dark blue. "And this," I said, "is the residential lease agreement." Sarah frowned. "You made your son sign a lease?" "I did. When he moved in 6 months ago, he needed proof of residence to apply for a small business loan. He asked me to write a letter. I told him I would do better. I drafted a formal lease. I charged him $1 per month." I flipped to page 4. Clause 14b. I read it aloud, my voice steady in the quiet kitchen. "Tenant agrees that no locks shall be changed, added, or altered without the written consent of the landlord. Any violation of this clause shall be considered a breach of lease and grounds for immediate termination. Furthermore, the landlord reserves the right to treat unauthorized lock changes as a criminal act under North Carolina General Statute 14-159.13. I looked up. "He signed it, Sarah. He laughed when he did it. He called me a bureaucrat. He said, 'Mom, you and your paperwork.'" Sarah looked at the signature. It was scrawled, hasty. The signature of a man who thought he was above the fine print. "He signed his own eviction," she whispered. I took a sip of the coffee. It was hot, bitter, and grounding. I pulled my cell phone from my purse. I did not dial Brian. I did not dial Courtney. I dialed the non-emergency number for the Raleigh Police Department. "Dispatcher," a woman's voice answered. "This is Margaret Sullivan," I said. "I am requesting an officer to 422 Elm Street. I am the property owner. I have a tenant who has performed an illegal self-help eviction by changing the locks and barring my entry." There was a pause. Usually, dispatchers hear screaming. They hear crying. They do not hear a 72-year-old woman citing statutes. "Ma'am," the dispatcher said, "is this a domestic dispute? Is the tenant a family member?" The tenant is my adult son, I said. However, this is not a domestic dispute. This is a criminal trespass and a violation of a signed lease agreement. I have the deed and the contract in hand. I am currently locked out of my primary residence. Are you in immediate danger? No, I said. I am across the street at 423. But I would like an officer to assist in enforcing the vacate order before the situation escalates. I will send a unit, she said. Officer Miller is in the area. Thank you. I hung up. Sarah looked at me with wide eyes. You are going to have him arrested? I am going to have him removed, I said. If he chooses to be arrested, that is his decision. I sat at the kitchen table and waited. I watched the house. I saw a shadow move across the living room window. Courtney, likely pacing. She was probably rearranging the throw pillows, staking her claim. She probably thought she had won. She probably thought I was crying in a guest bedroom somewhere, waiting for permission to come back for my toothbrush. 10 minutes later, a patrol car turned onto Elm Street. It moved slowly, silent, no lights flashing. It pulled up to the curb in front of my house. I stood up. I gathered my papers into a neat stack. Stay here, Sarah, I said. I walked out the front door and down the driveway. The officer was stepping out of his vehicle. He was young, perhaps 30. He looked clean-cut, serious, with a posture that suggested he was ready for an argument, but hoping for a conversation. He saw me approaching. He looked at my cardigan, my sensible shoes, my gray hair. I saw his shoulders relax slightly. He expected a confused grandmother. He expected a mediator. Officer Miller? I asked. Yes, ma'am, he said. Mrs. Sullivan? I am, I said. Thank you for coming. I understand you are having some trouble with your son. He asked gently. Look, ma'am, usually with family matters, we try to keep the peace. If he lives there, we cannot just kick him out. It becomes a civil matter. You might have to go through the eviction process in court. He was reciting the standard script. I let him finish. I appreciate that, officer, I said. And in most cases, you would be correct. If there were no lease, or if he had established tenancy without conditions, I would have to give him 30 days' notice. I handed him the red folder. But this is not a standard tenancy, I continued. He took the folder. He opened it. He looked at the deed first. Sole owner, he muttered. 1981. Then he looked at the lease. He flipped to the page I had flagged with a yellow, sticky note. Clause 14b. He read it. He stopped. He read it again. He looked up at me, and the pity in his eyes vanished. It was replaced by respect, and perhaps a little bit of fear. He signed this? Officer Miller asked. 6 months ago, I said. And he changed the locks today? While I was at church. I have the locksmith's name and the time of departure if you need to verify. Officer Miller closed the folder. He handed it back to me. Ma'am, he said. His voice different now, firmer. This changes things. This is a contractual breach with a specific criminal trespass provision. You are correct. This is an illegal lockout. He adjusted his belt. Do you want to press charges? He asked. Or do you just want entry? I want entry, I said. And I want him out. Today. Now. He nodded. Let's go have a talk with your tenant. We walked across the street together. The sun was starting to dip lower, casting long shadows across the lawn that Brian had promised to mow but never did. I walked with my head up. Officer Miller walked slightly ahead of me, his hand resting near his radio. We reached the porch. The new silver lock glinted in the sunlight. It looked cheap against the solid oak of the door. Officer Miller rang the bell. We waited. Who is it? Brian's voice came through the Ring camera again. Police department, Officer Miller said loudly. There was a long silence. Then the sound of shuffling. Then the sound of the deadbolt turning. The door opened. Brian stood there. He had changed into a clean shirt. He was holding a bottle of craft beer. He was smiling, but it was a tight, nervous smile that did not reach his eyes. He looked at the officer, then at me. "Hey, officer," Brian said, leaning against the doorframe, trying to look casual. "Is everything okay? I think there has been a misunderstanding. My mom, she is having a bit of a day. You know how it is." He gestured vaguely toward me, as if I were a senile aunt he was trying to corral at a wedding. "She gets confused," Brian continued, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "We had to secure the house for her own safety. We were just trying to protect her." Officer Miller did not smile back. He did not step inside. He stood on the mat, his boots planted firmly. "Sir," Officer Miller said, "are you Brian Sullivan?" "Yeah, that is me," Brian said. "Look, I can handle her. You guys do not need to be here." "I am not here to help you handle her," Officer Miller said. "I am here to ask you why you changed the locks on a property you do not own." Brian's smile faltered. "What? No, you do not understand. This is my house. Well, my parents' house. My dad left it to me. I mean, Mom lives here. But I am the man of the house now. I make the decisions. Can you provide a deed?" Officer Miller asked. Brian blinked. "A deed? It is in the file somewhere. But I do not need a deed. I am her son." Officer Miller reached out and took the red folder from my hand. He opened it. He held up the warranty deed, right in front of Brian's face. "According to the Wake County Registry of Deeds," Officer Miller said, reading from the paper, "this property belongs to Margaret Ann Miller, solely, purchased prior to marriage. Your father's name is not on it, which means you have no claim to the title." Brian stared at the paper. His mouth opened, but no words came out. "But," he stammered, "Dad said—" "Whatever your dad said is not legally binding against a warranty deed," Officer Miller said. He flipped the page. He held up the lease agreement. "And according to this," the officer continued, "you are a tenant, paying $1 a month, and you signed a contract stating that changing the locks is a criminal act." Brian looked at his own signature. He looked pale. Courtney appeared in the hallway behind him. She was wiping her hands on a dish towel, my dish towel. She saw the police officer. She saw the papers. "What is going on?" she demanded. "Tell him to leave, Brian." "I cannot tell him to leave, Courtney," Brian whispered. "Mr. Sullivan," Officer Miller said, "you have broken the law. You have performed an illegal lockout. Your mother has the right to have you arrested for trespassing right now," Courtney gasped. "Arrested? We live here. We have tenant rights. You have to give us 30 days. Not when you violate a safety clause regarding security systems," Officer Miller said. "You waived your rights when you changed that lock. I read the contract. It is ironclad." He looked at me. Then he looked back at Brian. "Your landlord is generous," Officer Miller said. "She is declining to press criminal charges at this moment. However, she is revoking your tenancy effective immediately." Brian looked at me. For the first time, he really looked at me. He did not see the forgetful old woman he had mocked on the doorbell camera. He saw the woman who had raised him, the woman who had bailed him out of trouble for 40 years, and who had finally decided to stop. "Mom," he said, "you cannot do this. Where are we supposed to go?" "You have 10 minutes," I said. 10 minutes? Courtney shrieked. "That is impossible. We have furniture. We have clothes." "You moved my things to the garage in less than an hour," I said. "I imagine you can move your essentials to your car in 10. Officer Miller checked his watch. "You have 10 minutes to gather your personal effects and vacate the premises," he said. If you are not off the property by that time, I will place you under arrest for criminal trespassing. Do I make myself clear?" Brian looked at the officer's face. He saw no sympathy there. "Clear," Brian whispered. He turned to Courtney. "Go get the bags." "Brian!" she screamed. "Go get the bags," he yelled, his voice cracking. "Do you want to go to jail?" Courtney turned and ran up the stairs. Sobbing, I stood on the porch. I did not go inside. I did not want to be near them. "I will wait here," Officer Miller said to me. "I will make sure they do not damage anything on the way out." "Thank you, officer," I said. I turned around and walked back down the steps to the sidewalk. Sarah was still watching from her window. I gave her a small nod. I stood by the hydrangeas and waited. The sun was beginning to set. The air was getting cooler. It was the longest 10 minutes of Brian's life. But for me, it was the first 10 minutes of my freedom. 10 minutes is a surprisingly long time when you are standing on a sidewalk watching someone dismantle their life. I stood by the blooming hydrangeas, my arms crossed against the evening chill. Sarah was still watching from across the street. I could see the silhouette of her head bobbing behind her sheer curtains. She was witnessing the enforcement of the contract, just as I had asked her to. Inside the house, I could hear the sounds of panic. It sounded like a herd of frightened animals was loose in my upstairs hallway. There was the thud of heavy footsteps, the screech of hangers sliding along a metal rod, and the distinctive rip of plastic trash bags being torn from a roll. Courtney's voice drifted out through the open front door. She was not screaming anymore. She was crying, a high, keen sound of genuine distress mixed with disbelief. "My shoes! Brian, do not just throw them. Those are suede. Leave the shoes, Courtney," Brian yelled back. "Just grab the essentials." He said 10 minutes. Officer Miller stood by the front door, leaning against the jamb. He looked calm, bored even. He checked his watch every 30 seconds. He was not there to help them pack. He was there to ensure they left. At the 7-minute mark, Brian came stumbling out the front door. He was carrying a laundry basket overflowing with clothes, cables, and toiletries. A bottle of shampoo fell out and rolled across the porch. He did not stop to pick it up. He ran to his car, popped the trunk, and dumped the basket inside. He looked at me as he ran back toward the house. He was sweating. His face was red and blotchy. "Are you happy?" he hissed as he passed me. "Are you happy now?" "I am not happy, Brian," I said calmly. "I am secure. There is a difference." He did not answer. He ran back inside. At the 9-minute mark, Courtney appeared. She was dragging 2 large black trash bags. She was wearing her expensive heels, and she stumbled on the porch step. She caught herself on the railing, dropping one of the bags. It split open, spilling a collection of my decorative throw pillows onto the concrete. She stared at the pillows. Then she looked at me. Her mascara was running down her cheeks in dark streaks. "You are a monster," she whispered. "We took care of you. We cooked for you. We kept you company." "You ate my food," I corrected. "You spent my money, and you tried to steal my house." "It is just a house," she screamed, her voice cracking. "It is just wood and brick. How can you choose a building over your own family?" "I did not choose the building," I said. "I chose the deed. And the deed says I do not have to live with people who lock me out of my own life." Officer Miller stepped forward. "1 minute remaining," he announced. Courtney glared at him, then grabbed the torn bag, stuffing the pillows back in with frantic, jerky movements. She dragged them to the car and threw them into the back seat. Brian came out one last time. He had his laptop bag over one shoulder and a box of files in his arms. He stopped on the porch. He looked at the silver lock he had installed only hours ago. "I paid $200 for that lock," he muttered. Send me the invoice, I said. I will deduct it from your security deposit. Oh, wait. You did not pay a security deposit. Because I waived it, he flinched. Let's go, Mr. Sullivan. Brian walked down the steps. He looked defeated. He looked like a man who had gambled everything on a bluff and realized too late that his opponent was holding a royal flush. He walked past me without a word. He got into the driver's seat of his leased car. Courtney got into the passenger seat, slamming the door so hard the vehicle shook. Brian started the engine. He did not look at me. He put the car in reverse and backed out of the driveway, scraping the bottom of his bumper on the curb in his haste. I watched them drive away. They turned the corner onto Oak Avenue and disappeared. Silence descended on Elm Street. Officer Miller walked down the steps. He adjusted his belt. Well, he said, that went about as smoothly as these things go. Thank you, officer, I said. I appreciate your professionalism. You had your paperwork in order, Mrs. Sullivan, he said. That makes my job easy. Most people just scream at each other. You brought the law. He smiled, a small, genuine smile. Do you have a way to get back inside? He asked. Since they took the keys to the new lock? I do, I said. I have the number of the locksmith they used. I suspect he will be very willing to come back and fix his mistake. Good, Officer Miller said. I will file the report for the disturbance. If they come back, they won't, I said. Brian knows I have the lease, and he knows I am done negotiating. Have a good evening, ma'am. He got into his patrol car and drove away slowly, patrolling the rest of the quiet Sunday neighborhood. I stood alone on the sidewalk. Sarah opened her front door and waved at me. I waved back, signaling that it was over. She retreated inside, likely to call the rest of the neighborhood watch. I walked up the driveway. I stepped over the bottle of shampoo Brian had dropped. I picked it up. It was an expensive brand, one I certainly did not buy. I placed it in the outdoor trash bin. I walked up the porch steps. The front door was unlocked. Officer Miller had ensured they left it open. I stepped inside. The house smelled wrong. It smelled of Courtney's floral perfume, heavy and cloying. It smelled of stale beer and stress. I walked into the living room. It was messy. There were empty soda cans on the coffee table. There were magazines scattered on the floor. The throw pillows were gone, taken in the trash bag. But the walls were mine. The floorboards were mine. The silence was mine. I walked to the kitchen. On the counter, I saw the spare key to the new silver lock. Brian must have left it there in his panic. I picked it up. I looked at it with disdain. I pulled my cell phone from my purse. I dialed the number painted on the side of the van I had seen earlier. Raleigh Rapid Locksmith. Dispatch. A man answered. Hello, I said. This is Margaret Sullivan at 422 Elm Street. One of your technicians was here earlier today. He installed a silver deadbolt on my front door. Yes, ma'am, the dispatcher said. We have that on the log. Brian Sullivan ordered the service. Is there a problem? There is a problem, I said. Brian Sullivan did not have authorization to change that lock. I am the owner. I have just had the police remove him from the premises. There was a silence on the line. Oh, the dispatcher said. I need a technician to return immediately, I said. I want the silver lock removed. I want my original brass hardware reinstalled. I assume you kept it? We usually keep the old hardware in the van for 24 hours, yes. Good. Bring it back, and put the charge for the service call on the card you have on file. Brian's card. I am not sure we can do that, ma'am. You performed an unauthorized modification to a property without checking the deed, I said, channeling my courtroom voice. I could report your company for aiding in an illegal eviction. Or you can come back, fix the door, and bill the man who ordered the mess. Which would you prefer? We will have someone there in 20 minutes. he said quickly. Thank you. I hung up. I walked to the refrigerator. I opened it. It was full of food I did not eat. Processed cheese, sugary sodas, a half-eaten pizza box. I took a trash bag from the pantry. I began to clear the shelves. I threw away the cheese. I threw away the sodas. I threw away the pizza. I worked methodically. I cleared the counters of their clutter. I wiped down the surfaces. 20 minutes later, the white van pulled into the driveway again. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said when he got to the door. He said it was his house. He had a key. He lied, I said. Fix it. I watched him work. He removed the shiny silver lock. He pulled the brass deadbolt from a box in his truck. He screwed it back into place. It looked right. It looked like it belonged. He handed me my old keys. "All set," he said. "I ran the card on file like you asked. Drive safely," I said. He left. I locked the door. I threw the deadbolt. The brass clicked into place with a solid, familiar sound. Donk! I was safe. I walked into the living room. I sat down in my wingback chair, the one by the window where the light was best for reading. I opened my purse. I took out the red folder. I looked at the warranty deed one last time. Margaret Ann Miller, sole owner. I ran my hand over the raised seal. It was just a piece of paper, just wood pulp and ink, but it was stronger than Brian's entitlement, stronger than Courtney's ambition, stronger than the silver lock. I closed the folder. I placed it on the side table. The sun had set completely now. The streetlights were coming on outside, casting long, amber pools of light on the sidewalk. My house was quiet. I thought about Brian. He was likely sitting in a hotel room right now, or maybe in the parking lot of a motel, listening to Courtney scream about her shoes. He was probably blaming me. He was probably telling himself that I was a cruel, vindictive old woman. He would never understand. I did not evict him because I hated him. I evicted him because he tried to erase me. He tried to make me a guest in my own history, and Margaret Sullivan is nobody's guest. I stood up. I went to the kitchen. I filled the kettle with water and set it on the stove. I waited for the whistle. When the tea was ready, I poured a cup. I stood by the window and watched the street. The house was big. It was empty. Some might say it was lonely. But as I took the first sip of hot tea, looking at the brass lock guarding my front door, I did not feel lonely. I felt like the lady of the house, and that was enough.